saw Gail's lecture yesterday. As you know, she's a landscape archaeologist from Australia, currently in Spain, and that's what our focus of the talk is today. She's going to be looking at the landscapes of the coast of death in northwest Spain, looking at the different aspects of the megalithic sites up in that area. So thank you, Gail, for joining us once again. And obviously, Gail will be taking questions after the lecture as well. So put those in the Q&A box. And we now hand over to Gail.
Lovely to be here again today. So today's approach is going to be a little bit different to yesterday. Yesterday, I kind of did a review of many, many years' work, which involved primarily the conclusions and our interpretations. Today, I'm actually going to basically guide you through a project that I'm currently working on with these people who have mentioned here, my colleagues here in Spain, on the landscapes within northwest Spain itself, particularly looking at dolmens. And so I'll be taking you through a little bit of the methodology. There might be some scary graphs and things like that, but I thought it was good to show you and demonstrate to you the kinds of things we have to think about and the kind of data we have to deal with. But don't worry, no statistics are involved. And lots of fabulous photos of the places that we went to. So let's begin then. So I want to demonstrate to you today that the individual Neolithic dolmens, so that's basically the name that's given to them in Spain for all megalithic tombs above ground, or they can be partially within a mound, but they're not usually subterranean, okay? So individual Neolithic dolmens of Galicia, which are on the southeastern side of the Atlantic facade, and we'll have a look at the map soon. So basically, I wanted to demonstrate that each of these dolmens are associated with several astronomical phenomena, each dolmen that is, and that these associations are indicated by the shape of the chosen topography at each site, as well as the orientation of each tomb, highlighting really that there was more than one way for a monument to gain a very significant connection to the natural world. And so in that sense, they're similar to the standing stones in Scotland. And we can see that the past peoples of the Middle Neolithic world of Iberia recognize, like the Scottish, that the land and the sky come together as connected elements. So where are we? Where are we going to be? So you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, we've got Spain, or Iberia, as we refer to it in prehistory. And the top left corner of that is the northwestern corner of Iberia, and that's Galicia. And so the central map there, which is highlighted with the blue and the orange in the topographical map, that's all of Galicia. And the black dots represent the hundreds and hundreds of mounds that exist just in this tiny area of Galicia. Now, within Galicia itself, my understanding is that every mound that has been excavated or exposed through time by people way in the past or very recently, because there was a tomb gold rush at one point because someone spread the rumor that there's gold in them, their little mounds. And so locals just started uncovering them, looking for gold to become wealthy. So there's generally, at least in Galicia, there's a dolmen inside every mound. Now with these mounds, in other places of Iberia, there have been mounds that have been excavated or dug out, and there are no dolmens inside. So it's possible there are some of these little black dots that may not have dolmens. And the little tiny greyed out area in the far northwest is Costa de Mort, or the coast of death. So here's a lovely topographical map of Galicia itself. And now we've got yellow dots. And these yellow dots are those mounds that we do know have dolmens. Often you'll find that if you're walking through a landscape, you'll often see a capstone, so the top of the stone of the tomb. And it's quite possible that underneath that there is an entire tomb. It's not just the capstone lying around that's been cast aside, which is often the case as well. But if there's even a slight inclination or a little bit of a mound there, it's quite possible there's a dolmen underneath. So the study we're going to look at today really focuses on those yellow dots that are clustering together in a very, very western north area. And so I'll just go back on that map. So see that greyed out area? The equivalent here, those exposed dolmens in that area. So let's have a look at what some of them look like. This is a fabulous one. This one, actually, I'm cheating because this is on another area. It's actually right next door to the coast of death. This is Asetos. This is a fabulous polygonal tomb. As you can see by the wonky ranging rod, it's a couple of meters above ground. But in fact, when they've been excavated, and I'll show you some, they could be 4 meters high, those individual stones. And then you have a little arrangement of stones at the front. That's the corridor. And usually there's little capstones on top of those stones as well. Sometimes the corridors are tiny, and really when they don't have the capstone, you could possibly enter. Otherwise, you can't enter by the corridor. Or if it's a large one like this, then you'd be crawling along if there is actually a capstone there. This is my colleague. He'll not be very happy. Here we are. And this is what happens sometimes, that the dolmens, the stones are actually stolen. So this is another polygonal tomb. But you can see behind the stone that the mound is still there. And the reason the umbrella is there is not to protect the stone, but because we were actually in the midst of a lightning thunderstorm trying to take photographs. And looking at sites within the forests. But there are other sites that are quite small. So you can see the ranging rod here and compare the height of the stones. And it's not just because they're below ground, but indeed there are many smaller mounds and smaller polygonal dolmens. This is very small. And if you look to your right, you'll be at the right bottom of the photo because for mysterious reasons, when I'm in Zoom, my mouse doesn't like to operate. So if you're looking at the bottom right-hand side of this particular photo, you can see actually the ground is dropping away. And that's a combination of the natural hill there that then turns into the mound, so it's accentuated. So there's a little mound as well that was built with this dolmen. Now, the fascinating thing about dolmens in Galicia is that they believe that usually the entire dolmen was not covered by the soil, and a little bit of the top, either just the capstone could be seen or part of the tops of the individual orthostats and the capstone. And that's, if you look up into the sky, you can see the moon. Okay. Pedra de Arca. This is another large one, very similar to Asetos, and this one is within the Coast of Death or Costa de Mort. You can see the actual mound itself here. It's quite clear, and you can see the fabulous polygonal chamber with the wonderful capstones, and then there's another little capstone further down. Just you drop your eye, and that is the corridor. The top one is Pedra de Arca again, but just so you can see some of the landscape when you're standing on the mound. And also we can see the corridor better here. Okay, here's a really tiny one. And this one is placed on the slope of a large hill. Again, I'm just giving you the idea of, whilst this one actually is wider than that really teensy one that we saw with the moon, it actually has the diameter of the chamber is much bigger, but the stones are quite small by comparison. This is a remaining one converted into a wall, as we get with standing stones. This is one of my favourite dolmens. It's really tiny, and I call it the Merry Christmas dolmen. It's actually Anta Zaramaceda. And naturally, I just call it that because of all the beautiful ivy and vines all over it. Okay, this is one of the most famous dolmens in Galicia itself, and also in Iberia. This is called Dombardes. Now, Dombardes used to look very much like the dolmen that we saw at the beginning as Asetos. In fact, it looked in worse condition. It was boarded up with wooden doors and bits of wire, and you could only see the top, meter of it, and so on. So this tomb is massive, and those individual orthostats are a few meters high. And you can see the stone at the vertical stone right at the front of the corridor. So this tomb was deliberately blocked at some point and basically put to rest. And I think one of the most intriguing things about Dombardes, which I totally love, if you look right down at the bottom, can you see those little tiny statuettes in a little curved row? Now, most of them were found in that position. Some others were found around the dolmen. And there are a few which are very anthropomorphic. So maybe all of them together are anthropomorphic. And they had little holes dug, and they've inserted the stones in there so the little statues would stand up. Here's the inside. And with the inside, obviously this is a panorama, and note the red and white paintings around the bottom of the chamber, but also they run down the corridor of the tomb itself. This is a different tomb, but I just wanted to show you that a lot of the tombs do have red and white or red and black paintings within them. Quite mysterious, a lot of them, though I can't remember what George has said about this particular one, but the middle part does remind me of how hide is often represented in painting, but it's not for me to say at this point. But I just wanted to show you that. And here's a reconstruction of how people were possibly laid out. There are not a lot of tombs in Galicia with bone because the soil is so acidic. There's just, the people are no longer sadly there. So that painting on the left-hand side, the reason I'm pulling this up now is to show you more closely what some of the objects that are found within these fantastic dolmens. I'm drawing your attention to the left-hand side picture, and can you see the little eye? They're called oculares, and really they're like the sun eyes. Now, why would I say that? Because surely it just looks like an eye, but this particular figure has been used several times through many hundreds of years, thousands of years within tombs within the Iberian dolmens, and they are much more similar to a sun rather than an eye. But you'll find that these are also placed in statuettes as eyes. And can you see the crescent, what could be a crescent moon also, next to what I always think of as the dancing lady, but in fact, when you put it into context with the painting, can you see a similar form to the right-hand side of the hide, the second figurine there? You can see that it has a very similar shape. So it's possibly not really the dancing lady. On the right-hand side, now we have these lovely little idols, and you can see the crescent moon shapes underneath through the middle band. Naturally, we do know, of course, that the crescent moon, the moon has many phases, and the crescent can be at the top, at the bottom, at the right or the left. There's all kinds of phases that you can see the moon going through according to latitude, times of year, and so forth. And we also know, though, through the Mediterranean, that that style crescent moon can represent cattle horns. So here we have my favourite idol stone. On the right-hand side, I saw it in the museum, and he also, or she also has little sun eyes, and there are some from Furisoa on the left-hand side of the screen, represented in a slightly different way. What's intriguing about this schist idol on the right-hand side, now this is total speculation and I'm just putting it out there. Thessa, my colleague, counted the same. We thought, oh, that's a nice necklace, possibly. And we just counted the little notches and thought, oh, they add up to 19. Lunar cycle. So, of course, we don't, total speculation, we don't know. But schist idols are very common. And we've only found one so far, though, associated with the tomb within Galicia. So let's get into the study itself. So the study area is highlighted in the brighter area there on this map. And the little blue dots are the exposed dolmens that we looked at within the bright area. Now we chose this, the Coast of Death itself is marked out in a red line, but we expanded our study area to look at or included basically all the water catchment areas that were associated with Costa de Morte, because in this way we knew that people tended to travel through these valleys, but also the water was accessible, for settlements and so forth. So we took in this whole area. So we're going to look at, in a very similar way as we did in Scotland, to look at the information held in the monument position in relation to landscape, its structure, so we're talking about orientation, and how all of these together are combined. So I'm just showing you a different particular dolmen within Galicia itself. And again, can you see that capstone and part of those, the great orthostats just poking out? This is very, very typical, and the mound that you can see there. I just wanted to really show you some beautiful pictures. I just think it's really informative, so you can really understand what they look like, because usually when you have people give lectures saying, here's the monument, and it's such an up-close thing, you don't know what's going on in relation to what can people see when they're there? What is the relationship of this monument to its surroundings? So these lovely panoramic photographs, or just photographs taken away from the monument, allows you to get a feel more of the landscape itself and where people lived. Okay, what is the first thing we did? Let me just flash back there. So if you look now at the line between the land and the sky, the horizon, basically what we did was we grabbed the elevation data from the government here within Galicia. And Andrew Smith, who many of you may know already, who wrote the Horizon program, converted this LiDAR data taken basically either from satellites or aeroplane flyovers and so on, of the shape of the landscape. We had 5 meter data, and that means a measurement taken of the height of the land every 5 meters. We had 25 meter data, and then we used 90 meter data for areas that could still be seen, but weren't within the border of Galicia. Andrew combined all of these to ensure that we had 5 meter data in the first 2.5 kilometers, because the land is very undulating. We didn't want to miss a blocking hill or something similar. And he converted all that data, combined it so it could be used within this program Horizon. So what we did, in a very similar way to what we did in Scotland, is we said, okay, what is the shape of these horizons? And so when you draw out this data, we can make these really cool graphs. So the top one only, you can see, is literally the shape of the horizon. The bottom part of that graph might be confusing. I wouldn't even bother looking at it, but I will just tell you the information contained within that tells you, say we're at north, you put your finger on north in the top one, you go, there's the shape of the horizon. You run your finger all the way down to the next graph, and that will tell you how far away that horizon is from you if you were standing at the monument. So this particular at north, this horizon is approximately 0.3 of a kilometre, so it's pretty close. So we took the data of 32 exposed dolmens within the coast of the Death to analyse the shapes of these to see whether or not they were deliberately chosen by the people who created the dolmens. Whoa, look at that. Here we have 32 different horizon shapes that are represented just by a thin line. And you can see there's at least 4 there that are totally on their own, doing in their own world, in their own cosmology. But there are a great deal of them at the bottom. In fact, 22 that we found in a statistical probability sense clustered together. A very similar horizon shape, as well as some references to distance and direction. So we decided, perhaps I'll explain now how we then, after that step of saying, yes, we definitely get 22 clustered together. They are all very similar in position. But what we thought we'd do is, let's look at all of them together and let's compare them with random points all over Galicia. So actually we did 320. We started with 100 and we thought that's not enough. We have to make sure we really check this. So we checked 320 random horizons, pretend monuments. What is the shape of the horizon in just any place in Galicia, basically, randomly chosen. So with all the sites, the whole 32 sites, what did we get? Okay, we're looking at the shape of the horizon profile. The very top line, the dark line, bit of science here, the dark line at the top shows you the average horizon shape in Galicia. So we've got a higher horizon in the east than in the west. If you look at the north, south, east, west, you look at the black line. The horizons are definitely higher in the east than the west. And now let's look at the dashed line underneath. This is the average horizons chosen for the dolmens. And it's the reverse. Eastern horizons must be lower. Western horizons, on average, seem to be higher. However, what we then did, we thought, we will apply some statistics to these comparisons. And what we found is that the eastern horizons, at least, are highly significantly different, running nearly all the way from north-northeast together to east-southeast, absolutely significantly different. There's the odd point just west of south, which is pretty close. So then we thought, I know, why don't we look at those sites that we know in a probability sense and statistically did definitely cluster together in terms of shape. Let's compare those with the random profile. And as you can see now, if you look quite closely, you can see again the dark line is the average shape of the random sites. And those dashed lines represent, the dashed grey line running underneath represents the shape of those 22 average horizons. And we are now in this probability sense, that horizon, nearly the entire horizon is significantly different to the average horizon. So the average profile of all of our actual dolmens are very significantly different from the sites that you come across randomly in Galicia. Whoa, what's that? Okay, don't be scared. What you find here, this is the remaining 10 sites. the remaining 10 sites still have the east lower than the west. So we're looking at the dashed line at the top graph, just the horizontal line. It's still higher, is lower in the east than the west, like the other sites, but their actual heights are so close to the random sites that there's no statistical difference there. But still, the shape's the same. Okay, what have we got here? Right, I'm just going to go back. Now, I want to show you something quite interesting here, and I'll bring it up again later. Now, we're now going to look at those yellow lines coming down, and I'll bring it up again, as I said, in detail. Can you see the yellow lines coming down? How fascinating that in nature, what we have discovered is that those yellow lines are actually the rising and setting points of the sun. So if we look at the east, the northeastern line, that's where the sun rises at the summer solstice. See, the peak happens naturally as well. That's the rising of the sun at the equinox in the center of that peak. And you move across, and at the edge of that little hill is the sun rising at the winter solstice. And we'll talk more about that. But what we can really see, though, are these amazing shapes of the horizon. You can see in the east, it rises up, and then it drops down again as you go south. In the west side, left and right, it drops down either side. So something like this. And we can see it demonstrated here at Pedra Cubierta. See how the horizon is running up and then across and then down. So we actually saw this when we were doing our field work. But we had to test if what we were seeing was a real effect. And you can see behind in the background, can you see that ridge line? Again, we have another ridge like this. And these ridges are west and east of these dolmens. Just another one in the distance. Pedra de Arca again, different shot. So that's a shot actually in line with the axis of the tomb. Okay, so let's go back to these solar lines. So it's quite intriguing that both in nature, but also then picked out deliberately by the people setting up the dolmens, we have the solar lines, as I've said, flanking these ridges and little hills in the east and the west. And the center of these ridges is the equinoctial sun. And what you'll find if you're looking at the dotted lines now, the horizontal dotted lines, is look at east and west. See how they've got their notches? So we've got notches marked out for where the sun is rising and setting on average, and the average profiles. Totally intriguing. So you would have seen this before, and I'm bringing it up again for you today as a reminder of when we're looking, or if we look at our horizon profiles, you'll remember what some of these lines are. So we had a bit of a lesson about this yesterday, you remember. So the red lines are, so we'll look at the north, which is the center of this picture. So the red lines are basically the rising that the moon takes at its major standstill, which is its most extreme northern rising point. Then it rises up, goes around and comes down, and then in the northwest, so still center of that picture, you can see a red line coming down and another arc. That is the moon at its most extreme setting point that happens about every 18-6 years. In the south, which we've doubled left and right of the picture, but we can look left because we've got arrows here. This is the moon's rising and setting at the, again, a major point, but in the south. The orange lines are the sun. The northern lines are the sun at the summer solstice, And the southern lines, orange lines, are the sun rising and setting at the winter solstice. Now we've got those green lines there. And you had a lesson yesterday in question time about the moon at what's called the minor standstill. And I'm just going to mention that because that particular rising setting point, which is inside, so the minor standstill is always bracketed by the extreme rising and setting points of the sun. So the minor lunar standstill is always within the sun's path, and the major standstill moon occurs outside and beyond where the sun can ever occur on the horizon. But I want to emphasize those nice green lines because they will become a significant discussion later. Okay, so here we have Pedro Cuberta, which we've encountered a few times now with that fantastic ridge. And now we've inserted this model into horizon. And you can see quite plainly that the moon flanks, not the sun really. So we had the sun lines originally as our first idea. We propped that on there. But actually the moon is flanking the edges of these ridges. The moon at the major standstill. So for example, here in the lower picture, we're looking east. And we can see at the center of the ridge, we have the equinoctial sun rising. And right at the edges where the sloping is coming down on average, we've got the major moon rising both at the major standstill in the north, its most extreme rising point, flanks one side, and the most extreme southern rising point flanks the other end of the ridge. I was just quite blown away by that when we saw this. Let's see what's going on. Here are a few others, just to give you an example that in nature, things are not going to be as exactly as my perfect one at Pedro Cuberta, but people still give it a go. It's always the average pictures. So if we look at, sorry, please excuse me for a minute. Too much talking yesterday. Okay, if we look at the third one down, Casota Frians, we can see in the west, which is the left-hand side, because the center is north. Okay, the center of these nice horizon profiles, these nice landscapes is north. South is always towards the right and left. So if we're looking, therefore, at the west, so the left-hand side, you can see again that there is always a bit of an approximation for the ridges. And Levre, the next one down, but still, basically, if you're measuring, the equinox itself hits the center. Okay, whoa, what's happening here? Thousands of clock-looking things. Okay, each of these circles represents a view from each dolmen. What do I mean by that? You have to imagine that you are a teeny weeny dot in the center of this circle. And you're standing in the center of this circle and you are looking around you. So basically, the circle itself is equivalent to the horizon around you. And what the black area indicates is where can you see and how far can you see when you are looking around yourself spinning 360 degrees. So for example, in the third circle, I'm standing in the center and it tells me, because north is always at the top, it tells me I can see quite a distance in the north and the northeast, but east and west, may as well give up. Can't see far there. And I can see a reasonable distance southeast to southwest. So these little black areas are telling you what you can see and how far you can see, I should say, really, in what direction you can see when you're standing at the dolmen. So some places you can see, they don't have very distant views at all. And what the most intriguing thing is, if you look really closely, some of them have red lines. So again, let's look at the ones with the red lines. These red lines indicate the orientations of the dolmens. We could only clearly see about 17 orientations because they're too destroyed. So you can only take it from the orientation from a dolmen that you feel secure in the knowledge that this is where it should be. And have you noticed that these little red lines, when we go through them, let's look up closely. These little red lines are always close to very close horizons. So the dolmens are actually facing close, hugging horizons. Not distant, amazing views, you know, out there to the sea or some such. They're facing those ridges. And also, they're not facing the center of the ridge. They are actually facing to one side of the ridge. So I'm just going to flick through to get back to Pedro Cuberta. So basically then, when you're standing at a dolmen, your view is towards the southeast, east to southeast, okay? And here are the actual orientations of our dolmens within Costa del Morte, and you can see they mirror, of course, the overall orientations of all the dolmens within Galicia. What we found when we were applying our assessments was there are actually 3 clusters of orientations. There are some just south of east. There are a group just further north of the winter solstice sun rising. And then there's these groups that flank the winter solstice rising. So some are totally out of the general rising range of the sun altogether. Okay, I'll just quickly flick. Right. So what I'm going to do now, this is Benito's work, my colleague, Benito Estevez. So this is actually his orientation work. He did all this work in the field. Okay. So what we did, if you look at the third column, these are possible targets of the orientations of the dolmens, just possible, okay? Now, what we found though was that when we looked at, if we're trying to look at how accurate something was, we thought, you know, those targets, they're not that accurate, are they? Yes, dolmens can have quite wide chambers. Yes, you can have quite wide corridors, but seriously, it's not that hard to, you know, have a stick and a bit of string. And when you've got really close horizons, this just doesn't seem quite right. But we did notice that right down the bottom, Dombate, which is 1, 2, 3, third from the bottom, is very close. It's within a degree. And Dolmen Caballeros, which is the third from the top, it is within a degree of the equinox. Why have we got such inaccuracy in general? Okay, what's going on? Well, there's a couple there that hit the minor lunar standstill, but there's no clustering. What's happening? We thought that they were astronomical. So we thought, well, let's look in the other direction. How many people have done that? Because the dolmen is actually closed at the back, but at the back, remember, you have a massive backstone, remember that picture, and it has that beautiful artwork on them. They are the situation with the most artwork. So when we started looking at the orientations in the other direction, the only other people who've really done that with lots of dolmens is Juan Belmonte and probably his colleague Thessa. Now, apart from the first few at the top, we found, oh, wow, mostly within like 1.5 degrees to dead on. Oh my God, is it actually the other way? Is the backstone more important than looking out? Is looking through? Which way were the dead facing? Okay, so let's just look at Dombardes, because we do know, at least in both directions, whether you're going through the backstone or through the looking out through the corridor, the orientation is very accurate. Thessar, my colleague Thessar from this paper, who you'll see his name again later, they modelled the Dombardes tomb, because, you know, it's blocked, the entrance is blocked, so you can't wait till the sun comes up and do your tests and so on and so forth. And also it's now undercover. So they did a 3D model of it and had the sun in effect going down the corridor. And what they found was that with Dombardes tomb, the sun will run down the corridor and then it plays along the red and white paintings that run at the base of the backstone. It never goes higher than the top line of the red and white paintings. So that was a very fascinating way of trying to understand what is happening at this dolmen. Why is this possible solar orientation relevant? You know, hopefully you can think about Newgrange, for instance. Similar kind of feeling and effect here. So here we have these orientations for Costa del Morte in both directions. Let's look at both directions. What's going on? Why? Is there really any reason for all of them? Because they are erected in different dates and times. So we had to try and find out, and we thought, okay, why have we also got all these orientations clustering together, but never really hitting the traditionally discussed concepts of orientations, like the equinox, the winter solstice, the summer solstice? And we thought, well, how does the sun travel at this along the horizon, like in a literal astronomical sense? I'm going to have to hurry up because I'm running out of time. Okay, remember this picture from yesterday. Top right-hand side, the sun at the winter solstice. Remember, the sun at the winter solstice is the start of winter. It is not midwinter. It's the start of winter astronomically, okay? And the summer solstice, which is the central picture here, where the sun is the most to the north, where it rises in its most northern position, that is the start of summer. So these concepts are mine. Let's race through the rest of the talk. Okay, what I've marked out here in colour are the seasons and where the sun is in the season. Now, I've had to exaggerate it, and I'll explain. I had to exaggerate it so that by eye we could see it on this very small screen. So let's start with the east, the brown circle that begins with the winter solstice. Can you see the curve? Sorry, the partial circle, the brown line, starting at the winter solstice. Winter has begun. We travel along the brown line as the sun rises more and more northern each day through winter. It crosses east, and then we have spring, and we go up. The summer solstice begins, summer begins. We run down following the yellow line of summer sun, and it crosses east, and then it's autumn, traveling down. Okay, the opposite side is basically the setting. Okay, so what that means is, and we'll see a table in a minute, if we look at those orientations, these orientations, let's look at the ones close to the east. If we're thinking of the sun now, things that are happening related to the sun, those orientations can either be happening at the end of winter or the beginning of autumn. Okay, then we move down to the ones around the winter solstice. These orientations are happening either at the beginning of winter or the end of autumn. We only have a few that are in earlier parts of winter or the later parts of autumn. In fact, we have 2, you'll find out later, that are actually mid-autumn. But the rest flank the seasons. The same is true on the west. We just don't have time for me to explain that on the other side. None of this, so on the other side, perhaps I will, just very quickly. On the other side, we have orientations that, so let's go with the green line. Looking at the green line, that's autumn, right? Sorry, let's start with the yellow line. It's too hard to describe that way. So setting sun, summer. Summer solstice begins traveling down the yellow line. It crosses west. Autumn begins. Sun goes back the other way. Winter. So then autumn ends. Then winter begins. Brown line going up, crosses west. Spring begins. So our orientations for the setting side are the end of winter, beginning of spring, end of summer, because that's around west. And then the ones higher up are either the end of spring or the beginning of summer. Flanking seasons. So we won't go through that. I haven't got time. I'm going to do it like this. Okay, so what we've got are solar orientations. If they're solar, they're looking at the seasons, okay? Looking at seasons. The other thing that is very interesting that I'm not going to describe here because we don't have enough time really, but I think this is really important part of this, is remember we had a lot of orientations connected to the minor lunar standstill. Now, without going into this amazing graph in too much detail, because it's a lot of information, let's just look at the word that says set. Can you see the word on the left-hand side that says setting? And I'm running across to where it says SMLS. That's the minor lunar standstill. Now we're going to go up to the top of the graph. Now, what has been discovered by Fabio Silva and Pimento when they were doing their research is that at the time of the minor lunar standstill, this actually coincides with the winter last crescent. Okay, winter last crescent. I'm not going to describe this graph. I'm using it really as a prop for me to tell you these things. So all of the things many of the orientations, in the east seem to be linked to the winter last crescent. The other orientations that were around east, which is equal to 0 on here, that were flanking east in the rising and the setting, these are actually equivalent to the spring and autumn first full moon rise, okay? And those that were setting, again, were then equal to, excuse me for a moment. So we've got the rising sides. And then on the setting side, we have again, just as a prop for myself, we have again the spring or autumn full moon of interest. It's not the I've missed the equinoctial sun, oops. The probability is so high that it's of actually being interest in spring or autumn full moons, much higher than I accidentally missed the equinox again. The other thing is that for the setting points around the minor lunar standstill, the probability is exceedingly high for the summer first crescent. So what we've actually got is a massive interest in the phases of the moon linked to seasons, supported by a probability analyses. And we end up actually with 3 different groups of interests. And we're going to now very quickly just relay what these interests are, because as I said, it is very complex and it's very hard to communicate within an hour what's going on at these tombs. So firstly, we've got these fantastic landscapes, right? Fabulously shaped with the sun and the moon in these really interesting situations. We've got the orientations of the tombs, which are mostly not solar. They're mostly lunar and they're seasonal. Actually, I'm going to skip this because we don't have time to go through that. Whoops. So what I want to explain to you about the seasons here, this is what the seasonal things do. Actually, I'll just give you one example. So Aquila Banda at the top, its orientation, it's facing and looking out at the winter last crescent moon. However, if it was looking towards the sun at that time, it would be the sun in the late autumn or early winter. So if the sun at the late autumn, early winter is hitting the tomb and running down the corridor, there's quite a possibility that the orientation on the other side could be the full moon, late autumn or early winter. However, there's always more than one orientation for each tomb in each direction, because the back of this tomb also marks out the sun at the summer solstice. The other side, not the corridor, the other side. And if there is a sun at the summer solstice, interestingly, there's also the minor lunar standstill in the opposite direction. We could have a full moon at the minor lunar standstill at the summer solstice. So these alignments are actually crossing over more than one astronomical phenomena. And it's not that they chose one over the other. They're all important, and I'll explain why. So as I've already proposed, the majority, if not all of the orientations found at Costa Morta are linked to the milder months of the year. They're not linked to the middle of, high summer or high freezing winter. They're linked to autumn and spring primarily, or the beginning of summer and the end of winter. We only have 2 sites potentially associated with the astronomical midwinter and midsummer, literal middle of the seasons, not solstice. We say potentially, of course, because the sun always crosses these points twice for 2 seasons. Such evidence shows some support for the idea, I think, that the majority of the alignments found at Costa Morte are much more likely to be linked to those times of regular climatic, environmental, regional changes and resource management associated with the milder times of the year, when people are actively engaged in their land management activities, they're hunting, they're herding, they're gathering, they're growing. In tombs in other parts of Iberia, we find there is association with barley and broad beans and poppies put in with the dead. And it's very well known in Iberia that broad beans are usually sown from late autumn to early winter, are predominant orientations, and that by the end of spring, they're usually ready for harvesting. The only reason we do not likely find them in Galicia is because the soil is so acidic that anything organic is destroyed, including the people. So whilst I haven't been able to present you with all of the evidence today, and we did rush through a little bit of some scary graphs, I really want to argue that there was a very perceivable connection by the Neolithic people between celestial orientations, the landscape topography, the regional climatic seasonal changes, and the concomitant kind of environmental landscape changes, as well as resource management and use, fertility, the coming into being, the passing away of things. All of these things together are channeled through the materiality of these dolmens. They're placed, all this ideology is built into the dolmens in these places in the landscape. This is the place where technology, nature, and cosmology met, and why, essentially, to quote Prieto Martinez, while the Galician Neolithic essentially dissolved into megalithism. So, lastly, in Costa de Morte, I think in the northwest of Galicia, it's clear that these landscapes, like those we saw in Britain, have a very particular horizon profiles that coincide with astronomical phenomena. These phenomena bind and bond the landscape chosen by the builders of this monument. And the visual effect of such landscapes is very striking, as we saw in Scotland. I think that what I really tried to show you today is our first steps to understanding the really complex cosmological systems of people in the past that are connected to nature, to time, to activities within Galicia, and in what ways these might be shared with their cousins, in a sense, and neighbours across the Atlantic facade in Britain and Ireland. The same, but different. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gail. Most appreciated. Thanks so much for bringing this information to all the megalithomaniacs. We do have a few questions lined up, so we'll crack into those. So the question: when researching burial mounds in the Peak District, the feeling among archaeologists seems to be that they were placed on the skyline as a statement, perhaps making territory boundaries. Are you considering this as well as alignments? Obviously, both could be happening.
The thing about the dolmens in Galicia, depending on where you are, they're not always visible as a group unless you have the little cemetery of them. So whilst I think they are, because you can have cemeteries, whilst I think they represent groups of people living there, as territorial markers, I think they probably act more like, not this isn't my territory, but this is our home. In that sense, not to say we are here, we're amazing, and look at our beautiful dolmen over there. I think sometimes with things like Dombates, because, you know, they're quite covered. And the only places like Babantha, you can actually, they're much more, in a sense, territorial there, because what happens is you're walking along, you're at a dolmen, you can see the next one. But you can't see the others. And then you walk along to that one, and then you can see the next one. And only at points where the paths cross can you then see two, and you can choose to go that way or that way. And they take you through and travel through the landscape. So in a sense, they are guiding you through territory, but whether they represent territory in the same way. So for example, you know, like down around Stonehenge, you're in the valley and you can see these tombs, whoa, surrounding you like this. They don't operate like that, but I think they do still represent about, this is our place. So in that sense, that kind of sense of territory, I think so. It's a very interesting question, and we definitely would like to look into that more. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. We have a question from Rob Black. And is the software of methodology available for us to try on other megalithic sites? He says, I've noticed the amphitheatre effect at the Duddo Stones, Swinside in Cumbria, I think.
Yes, Horizon is a public available software. And I think if you just type Andrew Smith Horizon, very, very simply a textualized web page will come up. But on his web page, he has a software link for you to download, and you can click on that, and also the manual will come along with it. So there's a really detailed, excellent manual by Andrew about how to use the software. And that program is written to be used with the free software STRM data, which you can also get for free online.
Okay. Paul Burley asks, this is great presentation. Have you been able to confirm that astral alignments were not relevant to dolmen orientation?
Oh, stellar, does he mean? No, I don't understand that. Sorry, could you say that again?
He asks, have you been able to confirm that astral alignments,
Oh, astral.
yeah, were not relevant to dolmen orientations?
Does he mean stellar lines, or does he mean something else like astral?
Stellar, yes. Yes.
Stellar, yes. Okay. Okay. Now, Fabio Silva has been working on stellar things in Portugal. There is not yet a lot of, like, for example, statistical tests done on stellar alignments, but I certainly would not say no. I would say that that's something that really has to be investigated. There's, I think it's Antares that was looked at. And because the little cemetery in Portugal, sorry, I've just forgotten the name off the top of my head at the moment, looks at a mountain that is ethnographically known as Star Mountain. So they felt that was some, extra support, perhaps, for this, long-term memory of the rising star in alignment with these prehistoric dolmens. So that's the only work that I'm aware of in Iberia that looks at that. And I think it would be interesting to also look at those things in the same way that we did for Scotland. Mm.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question from Matthew Smith. Have you compared notes with other dolmen sites around the world and see any correlations, perhaps some cultural fingerprints? He also says, I recall hearing that Western Europe being predominantly the southeast and northwest directions or orientations, Thrace, Anatolia being south. But I was surprised in Malta to be told that they are random and aligned with topographical features like valleys. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, this is really interesting. I haven't, in all honesty, looked in detail for a long time at the work that has been done elsewhere, and I have been fossicking around a lot in Western Europe, I have to confess. And I do know, for example, that the Mediterranean early historic shrines, in the Bronze Age, they're thought of to be astronomical, but as well with landscape features, but I'm not sure of the directions. When it comes to tombs, megalithic tombs in Central Western Europe and Britain, most of them, not all of them, rise in the solar band of the rising and setting sun. But in Iberia, most of them tend to be southeast. The rest, I actually don't know, and I have forgotten, and I can't comment on that, and I'm disappointed.
No worries.
I'm going to have to go and find that out. I've been living in my own world too much.
Okay, good. Well, no problem. Sorry. We've got plenty of other questions to get you to answer, so we'll certainly fill up the time here. So Laura, megalith hunter, she says, really fascinating stuff. Since the little stone corridors leading up to the dolmens are too small to fit inside, is it thought they were built over after the burial for symbolic reasons rather than practical ones?
I think actually what happened was that, yes, there's always some kind of symbolic involvement there. But I often think that maybe they didn't put the capstones on till a little bit later with those that are too small. And also I think they might be mimicking the larger dolmens in a sense, for whatever reason, why they didn't choose to build, a communal, larger looking tomb. Excuse me. So I think they are always symbolic. They always mean the same things as the larger ones where you can get into. But I do wonder that maybe you are meant to crawl through them, because I remember being in Scotland in some of those long barrow mounds in the northeast of Scotland, which are inside, of course, you have a chamber and so forth, and it's actually made of stone. We had to crawl in to get into that chamber. It was like this high, maybe. It was a bit nerve-wracking with lots of people in front of you and behind you. So maybe it's actually part of the deal that you have to crawl into the chamber. And I find that quite intriguing, that idea.
Yeah. Very interesting. There's a few more questions. Paul Burley asks, how well are the dolmens you mentioned in the lecture, how well are they dated? Are they accurate?
Yes, good point. I think I have a slide for that. Let me put my glasses on. I thought I'd actually draw. Did I keep a slide for dates? Sorry, let me just, did I actually jump out? But no. Okay, so basically, there are a good number of tombs dated in Galicia. The earliest one, though, the earliest two are dated to approximately 4,500 BC. That's, or maybe 4,700 BC. They're the earliest tombs, and they were built for about 1,000 years and or used in that area. So, so we have some dates, but we need a lot more. And not having organic material is tricky, so you have to date often by charcoal, which is organic, but it's burnt, right? Burnt material. We're always using burnt material.
Okay. We've got.
If they want to send me through chat later their email, I can send them a table of dates.
Okay, fantastic, good idea. And you can continue chatting with the people asking questions, obviously in the chat box throughout the day. Howard Crowhurst asked a question. In Brittany, the astronomical alignment is very often the diagonal of the corridor. Have you looked into this?
The diagonal of the corridor. I need a picture. So I'm trying to understand when he says so here's the corridor. So he's saying across in that direction, like so. Is that what they mean by the the diagonal like that? Are they saying yes or no?
I'm not getting anything just now, but Howard's lecture is next, so he'll probably explain all that, and maybe you can chat. Maybe we can bring
in Brittany they do have rectangular, or at least one rectangular megalithic structure, and its orientations are, well, like so literally that way, but also diagonal across it, and its major orientations are across the diagonals. So maybe, in a sense, the corridors evolved out of that kind of concept.
Okay.
I think that's what they're saying.
Yeah, we've got one more.
Considered it. That's interesting. I'll talk to Thessar about that.
Yeah, and Howard's going to be giving the next lecture. He'll go into what his research on that kind of thing. He's got one more follow up to that, and again, he says a hill in the east can allow the equinox sunrise to be first flash rather than the sun sitting on the horizon. What do you think of that?
I think that's a nice idea. I like the idea of also because of its position. So basically, no tombs are oriented on that, but I think as a striking phenomenon, that could be really important to see in the landscape. However, maybe as I said, I think that most of these are likely to be lunar, like the lunar calendar that has come down through the ages, like it's been around for thousands of years, that it's all about the beginning of autumn and spring when the festivals happen, right? Usually, especially in Galicia still today. But still, perhaps even these orientations flank the flash, so to speak. So you have this fantastic, and they can actually mark out those sorts of things. And that's a possibility as well. But I still think that if we're looking for something coherent in terms of orientation, I think the moon wins. Sorry, sun. But the sun is still important because the sun brings the seasons, and you can't get the changes in the moon's phases without the sun, and they would have seen that link.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question from Hugh Evans. He says, fascinating lecture, thanks. And he asks a technical question. The aberrations from the solstices seem to be between 0 and 4 degrees. Might the aberrations be a result of precession of obliquity, i.e. the changing tilt of the Earth 22.1 to 22.4 degrees, with a periodicity of minus 41,000 years? Would this help to date the dolmens?
Okay, now first we do have actual carbon dates for dolmens. Secondly, we all of our astronomical, let's just grab this. All of these supposed risings and settings of the moon and this and this and that here on these landscapes, the program is actually set, for example, for these at 3000 or 3500 BC. Where was the sun? Where was this actual sun at that century? Where was it? Or actually in millennia, because we know the sun barely changes over the millennia, it's rising and setting. Where was it situated? So we factored that in to our actual alignment assessments and within the programs already. So they're factored in. So I think sometimes can be a little bit of a danger if we work backwards, and that's to say we don't know the dates of anything. We're making the assumption that they're astronomical without testing anything else, and we're going to see we're going to assume it's the sun. So where would the sun have been? No, the sun is here. So what date would that have been? I think you can kind of get it a bit backwards. You might end up in a bit of a dangerous situation. I think the starting point is always, we don't know what it is yet. Let's find out and work slowly forward that way. I think once you have enough dates and or enough perhaps statistical evidence for an alignment onto something that occurred through time, then maybe you can start retro dating some groups of similar things in similar areas. And in that sense, maybe then it's an extra layer of support onto what you've done already. Then it becomes an important thing to look at.
Thank you. We've got a quick question from Martin Sweatman, one of our speakers. He says, the distribution of dolmen orientations reminds me of the distribution of temple orientations on Malta. Is there a potential link?
Well, I think there possibly is a potential. There's always particularly a potential link from things from the Mediterranean. But I can't remember the dates of the Maltese temples. Damn, I'm not doing well with remembering other areas today, am I? If I'd known what the dates are, I could answer that. But in general, remember, we're talking about 3500 BC and before and earlier for first monuments here.
I think
the thing is that the Mediterranean, the very early Neolithic in Iberia was influenced through the Mediterranean, okay, because they brought their animals and they brought them by boats. And the earliest Neolithic in the Mediterranean is around like 7000 BC when they started bringing, or earlier, 9000 BC for some of the Western Isles, bringing animals in and through. So I think perhaps there's always some kind of cosmological influence, I think, from the Mediterranean into Iberia.
Because Martin mentions that, the dates are similar, 4,500 to 2,500 BC. But there is earlier dating. There's more. There's a work of Lenny Ridgick, who's produced a book, Sirius, Star of the Maltese Temples. She spoke at our Origins conference in November. She's actually joining us on our tour to Malta next March. And she believes they're actually going older and older because Sirius is connected, so there's a whole new dating thing being put through at the moment, which has caused a bit of a problem and annoyance of academia regarding the Maltese temple. So, but that's all in the process of being looked at again. So that's real, and that, some of them, she says, goes back to 9,000 years old.
I think that a lot of particularly southern Spain is influenced by the Mediterranean in terms of dolmen structures.
Okay.
They're far more palatial. They're far more, whoa, out there, monumental. Very, that kind of similar way to what's going on in the Mediterranean. So I think in that sense, something a bit different, and I don't know what it is, something different is happening in the north. There's some kind of other influences going on. And, remember the people out of Iberia went into southern France and off up into Brittany, mixed around with people from Central Europe and went into Britain. And also, though, people can come from the Brittany down the coast, sailing Mediterranean link between Brittany and the northwest Iberia. And I think there's a bit of a connection going on there. But in southern Spain, definitely the influence from places like indirectly or directly Malta and so on. That's my personal feeling. Brittany, of course, the influence is direct. And we know from Bettina Schultz-Paulsen's work about the arrival of megaliths into Iberia. Anyway, northern Iberia.
Okay, we've got time probably for one, maybe two questions. So please be aware, attendees, if you're listening. This is the break time we're going into here, and we are starting the next lecture at 12:30 sharp. So we'll just take one or two more questions, and then we'll give ourselves at least a small break. And again, remember, Gail will be around today. You can chat with her in the chat box and also on the panel. So if we can't answer all the questions, forgive us. We will make sure you can put them in first for the panel later. So Katie Ball asks, do you think there is any connection to hallucinogens and ritualistic journeys to the land of the dead, maybe by findings of poppy, the poppy known as opium? Broad beans are hallucinogenic when eaten in their green state. Barley crops can be blighted with ergot, etc. Do you think there's a connection there?
I don't know if there's a connection, but I would not dismiss it. I would not dismiss it because we're getting to understand more and more about shamanistic rituals in prehistory, particularly through actually the finds mainly through Eastern Europe and Siberia and places like that, the potentials of this kind of actuality. And we often go, oh yeah, it totally happened in the Mesolithic. Oh, the Neolithic. What are shamans again? It's a bit like that. So I think that if not necessarily a shaman, but altered states, whether it's through sitting and looking at the stars and feeling very connected with the sky and having your stories of Dreamtime or the equivalent, very serious creation stories, and all of this, in a sense, we think of them as otherworldly, but to them, I think to people in the past, it was all one, right? You don't separate these connections. And so the experiences that they possibly had through these things, I don't think should be dismissed. And I think it's part of the magic of cosmological belief systems and stuff like that.
Okay. So we're going to have to just take one more quick question, and then I'm going to leave the other questions in the Q&A, Gail. So if you're okay with that, you can actually type in the answers.
Yes. And can I just respond to that? I'll be doing that within about half an hour after the break because I do have to step away momentarily.
That's fine.
And I just wanted to add too that I would like perhaps during the panel time to bring in some of the ethnographic evidence about the megalithic sites here in Galicia and how that actually supports a lot of the stunningly the prehistoric stuff. So that's later.
Okay, so one more question. We'll take this question from William Prin. Have you done any work at Finisterre or looked at connections with Camino de Santiago?
No, I haven't, but we actually have people here at Incipit who do work on things like that and with the sacred various muros and which are supernatural people, women who possess supernatural powers ethnographically, and the importance of wild animals connected to local goddesses and things about the Camino as well. And it's perhaps more ancient roots. Quite a lot of work has been done on that. It's not something I have done, but other people are doing it, and it's totally fascinating. So maybe have a look out for that. Maybe do a bit of a Google search, because there'll be, but I myself, in connection to astronomy, if we're thinking of that, or I have not done that. And I think it would be very interesting to have a look at. Thessa, he does everything. He has probably started something. I'll ask him, actually. He's a physicist and an astronomer and an archaeoastronomer working with archaeologists. So he works at all levels of history. So look out for Thessa's name.
Well, thank you so much, Gail. Thanks for your time.
Okay.
And Gail will be around a bit later for the rest of the day and in the Q&A. So really appreciate you taking your time out to share your amazing research with the Megalithomaniacs.